Hi everybody, this is Leo Vallant with the second and final part of my series, The Power of Mythology. Now let's get started. I did a video series a while back called Revolution from the Top, where I spoke of how we'd be soon entering the machine intelligence age where all data on everything and everyone would be collected and analyzed by supercomputer predictive modeling systems, allowing the world and all of us in it to be managed by a godlike intelligence with a providential will. But looking at just this one facet that we've been discussing here, the power of suggestion, with its impact on healing and social well-being, well, do we think that the brave new machine intelligence system would decide to maintain the population in the scientific mindset of materialistic doubt and uncertainty? Or do you think that the intelligence would see the value in returning the world to a mythological age of faith and innocence? Okay, if the mythological model would prove to be happier and healthier for us, well, wouldn't that preclude any choice in the matter? With a preponderance of benefits being predictively certain, there would be only one way to go with it, wouldn't there? At least for the general population. Really, our brave new civilization could do with the scientific truth of things what prior mythology-based civilizations had done with their cold, hard truths. That is, confine them to the care of some elite and isolated group of the highest of high initiates in some holy of holies where they'd swear on their lives to keep that dangerous truth a secret, even while they keep that truth alive, though safely sequestered. Yes, some people would have to know the truth. If the world becomes a huge stage set for mythology, well, somebody has to know where all the handles and levers are being pulled. And the machine intelligence system would recognize the value of a human backup as a kind of existential insurance of its own, because it might take a human finger to push some great big reboot button in the event of some solar flare disaster or whatever. So yeah, I think the universities will have a big role to play in this up-and-coming machine intelligence age, where I expect that PhDs will be the high priests of our tomorrow. And I think the reasonable rule for getting into such a priesthood program would be that one not be told anything that one hasn't half guessed already. Yeah, it makes sense that you wouldn't bring anybody into a secret society unless they have a secret you want them to keep. Right? Yeah, I think it's the condescending assumption of modern historians that all of the ancient priesthoods were benighted in ignorance, but only because it's assumed now that such priesthoods believe their own propaganda, and that it's somehow impossible that the ancient mind could have been as cynical and calculating as the modern. For instance, here's a great example. That today it's believed that the priesthoods of Egypt and Mesopotamia truly believed that the earth was flat in the center of the universe, with the sun revolving around the earth. Even while these priesthoods could prepare predictive calendars for lunar and solar eclipses, as well as the locational relationships of the planets to the constellations, where the calculations would have been obvious and easy only when applying the heliocentric, that is, the sun-centric model. Yes, the historians point to the elaborate and crazy super complex Ptolemaic Earth-centric model But that is effectively a functional inverse of the sun-centric model. And an inverse function is always easy to just mathematically derive when you already have the original function sitting right in front of you. And it wouldn't require the centuries of minute observations. It'd take the chart the Earth-centric model by tracing it from data points. Centuries where it would be assumed that no ancient mathematical genius could ever have figured out what came as a hunch in the afternoon to Copernicus during the European Dark Age. So yeah, to the lower level economic planners and retail astrologers, the priesthoods distributed Earth-centric charts, but only to preserve their secret. Yes, there were overriding mythological social engineering reasons for telling the people that they were at the center of the universe and that everything was as simple as it looked. And what's a secret society that doesn't keep any secrets? So it is either that the modern historians are the benighted ones, or they have their own agenda. That is, getting us to believe that the powers that be always tell the truth as they believe it to be. But how disingenuous is that? In believing that a policy of truth and transparency is and always has been the universal norm, when practically every newspaper we read, when there used to be newspapers, tells us that the truth is one thing and that the public statements are another. Or maybe our modern historians feel the need to stay in late with their ancient brotherhoods and keep to the secret and perpetuate their secrets, and leave it to the archaeologists to dig up the truth. And we can see other instances where it seems clear to me that the ancient priesthoods were creating mythology before our keen and discerning eyes. One example comes to mind. For instance, it's an easy guess that the Egyptian priesthood, who dealt with the pharaohs on a day-by-day basis and whose job it was to embalm the dead pharaohs, were probably pretty well aware that the pharaohs weren't gods, right? Also, the Egyptian priests obviously at one time or another conducted a study that determined the necessity for domesticating cats, where they found that cats not only reduced the storage losses of grain due to rodent infestation by predating on them, but that the very presence of cats repelled the rodents, thus leaving grain storage areas almost entirely unmolested. So what action did the priesthood take when they learned that? Well, they declared cats to be divine. Cats became like little gods. It meant that the people would have a legal obligation to protect, feed, and adore cats. And it really kind of caught on, didn't it? But obviously the priests didn't believe cats to be divine. No, they just wanted the people to open up their homes to them and to stop throwing rocks and eating cats for dinner. This was clearly mythology being created for the sake of social and economic engineering. It was the great lie that made surplus grain civilizations viable, and it was no accident that domesticated cats quickly spread to every surplus grain civilization in the world, probably being handed off from one priesthood to another, as tokens of professional courtesy and civilized goodwill in a cosmopolitan world, and that in many ways could be a model for us today. And next, look at India, where it would seem intuitively impossible for any intelligent human being to ever believe in reincarnation, where it's already really obvious that human life is organically based and is perpetuated by biological reproduction, and where if you then superimpose over top of it all the necessity for constantly returning immortal souls to what? Pilot these mere biovehicles? Well, it becomes too overwhelmingly contradictory or redundant. It'd be too complicated to be considered true, wouldn't it? Then, of course, there's the glaring inconsistency where reincarnation supposes past lives that nobody can remember. And nobody west of the Euphrates ever even imagined such a wild fiction as reincarnation. So it is that we can infer from the absence of any idea of reincarnation in all regions where it wasn't being advanced by a general indoctrination that there could have been no intuitive basis for reincarnation. But what we see is that none of that prevents the wide-scale belief in reincarnation, even in the West now, does it? No! It's actually kind of axiomatic these days that apparently the bigger the lie, the better. And if you repeat a lie long enough, most people will begin believing it. But we could wonder, why lie? Why make up something like that? Well, reincarnation and the karma system was conceptually designed to promise future life rewards to Black Dravidian untouchables as long as they dedicated their lives to the service of the white Aryan Brahmins. It was a mythological system of belief imposed by a small invading Eurasian Aryan population to subjugate the larger southern Indian native population. Well, okay, it'd be reasonable to ask now how the smaller was able to conquer the larger. Well, you see, the Aryans learned how to smelt cheap and plentiful iron ore, and so they could make harder and sharper weapons and also install iron rims on their wagon and chariot wheels, which, in turn, greatly increased the load capacity and the durability of these mobile weapons platforms. But the native population was limited to very expensive and much softer bronze, which limited the size, effectiveness, and mobility of their armies. Yeah, and keep in mind that the Aryans not only invaded India, but came down as a wide swath of destruction through Persia, Mesopotamia, and conquered Egypt too. Only China avoided invasion by being able to develop iron smelting on their own. But of all these Aryan conquests, well, except for in India, all of the subjugated peoples eventually learned how to smelt iron too, and became able to confront the Aryans with armies of equals. The difference was that the Aryans in India imposed a mythology that the natives chose not to fight. Yeah, while we generally believe that crime shouldn't pay, well, of all the mythologies found on Earth, the Aryan caste system, which is upheld by their doctrines of karma and reincarnation, well, they may have been arguably the most successful in achieving their objectives. Truth be told, India's Aryan Brahmins had the smoothest ride of any oppressors on earth, and the promise that any dark Dravidian could eventually be born a privileged white Brahmin too, Well, it seemed to be enough to keep most of the victims content and whistling while they worked. Oh, but should we be concerned that our future mythology might pick up where India's left off? Well, we need to remember that the Indian Aryans only wanted to reduce the native population to servitude because traditionally conquering warriors hate doing any work themselves. But in our machine intelligence and robotics age future, well, we'll have no need for servants. But that will give rise to another problem that we'll have to face. That is, that we'll no longer need so many people. Yes, now, probably 99% of the world population live as glorified draft animals, doing all the effective toting and lifting for the 1% who are the owners of nearly all the productive capital and resources. And it doesn't take a city block of supercomputers to tell us that a sustainable, climate-friendly civilization would be far easier to maintain if the population were just 1 unit of people instead of 100 units of people, or in our terms, just 80 million instead of 8 billion people. But I discussed that in greater detail in my series, Revolution from the Top. And so let's move on. But whatever our future mythology turns out to be, well, what we've learned from prior mythology-based civilizations is that we can assume that the plausibility of it doesn't have to be of any great concern. People obviously lean towards believing anything promising that they're told by their acknowledged leaders. And yes, telling people what they want to hear seems to work most every single time. But doesn't this tell us something about our humanity? That human beings are characteristically gullible, and therefore it's likely that that's the condition in which they're really the most instinctively happy. So yeah, it's probably a good guess that evolution's mechanism of natural selection places a higher premium on just nodding yes to leadership than it does on expecting everybody to exercise critical judgment in arriving at collaborative group consensuses, especially considering all the concomitant bickering and rebellion that might ensue from such ununified and unguided and therefore contentious debate, where dissension could be severe enough to precipitate the violent collapse and death of the society involved. Yeah, sometimes fighting over disputed worldviews can cause more harm than good, where even the winners come out battered and bleeding. And so we really need to learn to pick our battles. And peace is so precious that we must expect that it should come at a price. And that price may be the forfeiture of the truth. And it should be an easy price to pay, especially when the truth can so often be so counterproductive. Also, we need to understand that the unit for evolutionary natural selection is the social group, not the individual, and that in successful groups, the young succeed to the old and the group lives on. But in failed groups, where the internal dissension causes their downfall, well, everybody often dies all at once, putting a period to their evolutionary influence right then and there, which would be a good thing if all they were was a pack of rock-the-boat troublemakers, right? Yeah, what we're talking about here is the pack mentality as a survival mechanism, meaning that it only has to save more trouble on the whole than it causes. So, yes, while I realize that the pack mentality is fraught with problems too, but while the baseline intelligence of humanity remains so problematically low, well, it's probably best that the stupid majority is instinctually inclined to voluntarily follow their more intelligent leadership cadres. Yeah, so long as stupid people are predisposed to follow instructions, well, not everybody needs to be so smart. It's an evolutionary efficiency. So, yes, at least at the dawning of our future machine intelligence civilization, we might have to embrace the fact of human life as it stands today, that civilization can't function at its best without a supporting mythology. That is, some comprehensive backstory that explains the universe and our places in it, that's designed to promote social tranquility and a general sense of well being. And we've already established that it doesn't need to be either true or even all that plausible. Yes, I expect that many intelligent people would disagree with me, but my problem isn't with intelligent people. Really, most of us college educated people now separate ourselves out from the common masses, where we work and socialize almost exclusively with other intelligent people like ourselves. And our communities are populated by those intelligent enough to become our affluent neighbors. Well, this isolation and effective segregation allows us to forget just how stupid everybody else is. So, yeah, before giving me grief about being so undemocratic, try taking off your suit and tie and put on jeans and a t-shirt and maybe get a few tattoos put on your face and then go down and have lunch in a workers' break room, why don't you? You'll think you died and went to hell. Or maybe just to the zoo. So, yeah, just look at what we know about the distribution of intelligence, given all the standardized testing we do. Well, 75% of the people aren't sufficiently intelligent enough to appreciate the truth anyway. Really, education can enhance intelligence, but it can't grow it. And advanced education just bounces off an average normal human mind. And social planners know for an absolute certainty that the great majority of people are not college material, where increasing enrollments just decreases the graduation rate, with more students going in, meaning less students coming out. And on the personal level, any of us who had once gone off to a good college, well, think about it. Don't we all remember the euphoria? The euphoria we experienced when first we realized we had left all the idiots behind us back in high school. Praise the Lord. Yeah. The only time we ever see those knuckle-dragging boneheads anymore is when we go to the election polls in November. Yes, I know that many of us see the truth as being an ideal that we should hold ourselves up to, and so the idea of fabricating a mythology goes against our ethical grains. But beauty is also an ideal. And ordinary people of average intelligence understand that just fine, in their own terms. And that's what public surveys are for, to ascertain the aesthetic tastes of the hoi polloi. So, yeah, their lives can be structured so at least they think they're having a good time. So, is the truth really so important to them? Especially when the truth is an intellectual riddle that they're not up to figuring out anyway. So wouldn't it serve them so much better to feed them some easier and more practical non-truth some mythology that could give them a perspective they could relate to, and which could keep them happy, healthy, and out of trouble. Okay, now let's talk about implementing a mythological society. Yes, one concern I have with supercomputer predictive modeling is that while it's great at accurately comparing existing systems that have already generated huge data fields, but for anything just starting up from scratch, well, there probably wouldn't be sufficient data for getting anything but some meager and sketchy model. And yeah, while some new methodology may contain the exact same clusters of variables as the previously tried approaches, but if they're arranged so that their vectoring dynamics are all significantly different, well, the predictive modeling and analysis system might still be relatively clunky in assigning the scales and magnitudes of the effects it'd be trying to predict. With the effective size and shape of the predicted model being a grossly inaccurate distortion of what would actually happen. So, the predictive modeling system, in order to be sure enough about getting all of the quantifiable variables in their operational zone, where optimization would become just a matter of tweaking the algorithm, well, to do all that, the system would need to try out the new scenarios in isolation, by resorting to the use of designed and controlled studies using sample populations to generate the necessary data fields before going all in with the general population. So yes, the world is a big place, and I suppose some entire regions could be set aside where entire generations of insulated populations could be raised outside of science, outside of doubt, but within a mythology that could be as comprehensively beautiful, glorious, or socially moral as it would ever be possible to create. But yes, when first starting off, well, something would need to be positively taught to the children growing up. So what would that most likely turn out to be? Well, if our aim is to design a mythology that's comfortable and feels like it fits, then why not base such a mythology on a metaphysics derived from our own dream world? That is, the generalized elements from the best of everybody's dreams. Yes, in the machine intelligence age, everybody will have a personal assistant device or maybe tag-along robots that will act like inquisitive little data collectors, and every morning they'll start the day off with, "Tell me your dreams before you forget them." Well, with a world of people reporting in on their dreams, and with total surveillance and personal assistant devices collecting, compiling, and collating enough data to know everything about people's real lives and waking psychologies, well, the system would eventually be able to comprehend a coherent correlative psychology, comparing dream worlds or even astral worlds to the people's reality, so that all the archetypes and dream motifs could be understood in terms of their real-world life implications. Of course, the dream lives of those who are happiest and healthiest would be given a proportionately greater weight in the considerations. Yeah, we could get a psychologically accurate religion out of workings like that, couldn't we? And yeah, from that, a new mythology could be envisioned and developed. Just think about it, that by endeavoring to make our real world a reflection or even a realization of our dreams, well, we wouldn't ever again really need to wake up from out of the aesthetic context of our dream world. And yeah, It strikes me now that we'd probably have a great many more wardrobe choices than we have today. You see, dream work is largely about persona development, and the easiest way to make a persona visible is by using costumes and uniforms. Yeah, in order to express ourselves, we could dress as befits our innermost personas. Yes, I realize that unless we come across a full length mirror in our dreams, well, we don't really know what we're wearing, do we? But certainly our personal assistant devices, using their access to the know all, see all central system, could identify our persona needs as per the description of our dreams and help us out with the fashion catalogs in the morning. Oh, and there have been studies that do show that we really are what we wear. That we tend to live up to our costuming. For instance, there are two big differences between public schools and private schools, and they are that one, the private schools outperform the public schools, and two, that the private schools insist on uniforms. Yeah, the private schools dress up the kids like smart, disciplined students, and voila, that's what they become. Then, what we see in the Far East is that even the public schools insist on uniforms, and that their public schools outperform our public schools, where our stupid kids are allowed to dress stupidly. Yeah, there's even the phrase, dressing smartly, and it really means what it says. So yeah, costumes make the persona, and pride in one's persona begins first with appearances. Yeah, it might seem like wishful thinking that's too magical or too conveniently simplistic to be true, but just try it, and maybe, yeah, at first it might seem like just pretentiously conceited play acting and dress up, but after you get used to everybody else believing in you, you'll probably start believing in yourself. But we were speaking about implementation, weren't we? Well, of course, the first parent generation would need to be volunteers, upholding the mythology as though it were their own sworn truth. And they would necessarily need to be true believers in the plan. It would be a kind of cultural embodiment of fake it until you make it. But yeah, all the personal assistant devices, along with the total surveillance, would assure that nobody could stray away from the plan too far. And then it would help that the schools and all the books and media, that they'd be echoing the same mythological storylines. Yes, in order to be a fully functional mythology, well, it would need to be able to furnish some humanly compelling series of stories that could elucidate every conceivable social or moral situation that could arise in real life. It would be like a universal language in morality, and everybody could always be able to relate to what everybody else is talking about. Yeah, I think that the machine intelligence could itemize and list most every discrete category of social and moral situation. But that the stories and epic poems would need to be written, or perhaps heavily edited, in the universities. That is, unless or until machine intelligence can match or exceed the creative flair of our best writers. Really, any man or woman that grows up nurtured by a full, rich mythology will live a life in which everything, every event will be infused with meaning and significance, and where most of our moral choices will be clear and our life decisions confident. Compare that to our lives today, where the cold, hard, meaningless truth it gives us a bloated sense of uncertainty and emptiness, and where French existentialists seem to commit suicide on a conveyor belt. We will certainly much prefer the mythological life where everything will seem like we're skipping, dancing, or strutting through a lifetime of creative poetry. Yeah, that's what it means. But yes, the devil's in the details, and life might still be complicated. And as Confucius pointed out in China, well, righteousness can never be fully catalogued, and conflicts between competing moral imperatives may arise. So there might always remain some moral dilemmas to deal with. But in those cases, well, the mythology would only need to be able to trot out a series of stories in regards to resolving moral dilemmas. That is, in choosing either the better of two goods or the lesser of two evils, or where degrees of relative ascendancy can't be determined, the 6 of one and the half dozen of the other situations, well, there could be instructions on how to flip a coin. Heads. And besides, moral conflicts are good for a civilization. All the best novels are about moral conflict, aren't they? It's just imperative that either good always triumph over evil, or that justice shall prevail in the end. Yeah. Here's another thought. Arnold Toynbee, the great historian, was quite emphatic in regards to civilizations being able to adapt to new circumstances, because changes will inevitably occur. Yeah, even just going through the various stages of development will change a civilization's operating conditions, which would require some adaptive responses. Also, if the baby licensing protocols offer a smoother track for the more intelligent parental candidates, well, the population of the 20th generation would be significantly more intelligent than those of the first. This would probably affect the perceived plausibility of the mythology, and since not everybody can be taken up into some PhD secret society priesthood, well, the situation would require an adaptive response. Yeah, we might ask ourselves whether a smarter humanity might rebel against a mythology. A good question. But if the mythology had already provided centuries of thriving contentment, then it would be supported by the inertia of established customs and traditions. And even intelligent people would understand the concept of, hey, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. But yes, any changes deemed necessary could be introduced either incrementally and therefore imperceptibly, except by the universities that would keep mum about it, or, where necessity dictates, immediate changes could be presented as temporary emergency decrees, but which would never ever be fully tapered back. In my series, Revolution from the Top, I posited the likelihood that as confidence grew in the new machine intelligence system, well, there would be a concomitant growth in a distrust for human leadership and decision making. If this holds true, then it would follow that the system would largely speak for itself, with some synthesized kind of voice of God. But if it's found that the people do have trouble personally relating to that, well, it would be easy enough to select and put forward a popular prophet, actually an acting spokesperson for the machine intelligence system. Prophets have always been traditionally a harbinger of change. So, yes, the machine intelligence system could take advantage of humanity's psychological propensity for projecting personality types onto people simply because of their personal appearance and other ostensible characteristics. You know, that any decent prophet needs to be a tall, well-built baritone with a high forehead, thick wavy hair, and a strong chin or whatever. So, with that understanding, the system could identify some PhD priest that looks and sounds the type, and then he could pose as the prophet for the new and the better. However, we cannot preclude the possibility that some messaging might sound better coming from a woman, particularly if the machine intelligence age turns in a matriarchal direction, which would be fine by me. I like girls, you know. So, okay, we can anticipate that a society brought up consistently in myth and innocence would prove to be happier and healthier. But remember, as I stated before, such a society would necessarily need to start off as just an experimental offshoot colony, and then there would still be the primary population to consider later. So we need to ask ourselves how the machine intelligence civilization could eventually transition everybody over to the brave new mythological way. Well, it couldn't be done in just one generation, and what the great historian Arnold Toynbee tells us about cultural assimilation, well, it would probably take at least 3 generations. But this would be with the understanding that all media content would have to push hard to popularize the target mythology. So maybe we should ask ourselves now about the worst case scenario of what if the mythology really wasn't that generally popular? Well, in my scheme of thinking, everything always eventually reverts back to my favorite pet idea, the possibility for a collective consciousness. So here I'm thinking that if the machine intelligence mythology is largely congruent with the higher dream mind's vision of life, purpose, and manners, and if there is already a significantly large test population that demonstrates the success of this mythological model, well, if a collective consciousness is even possible, then this would likely be just the kind of scenario where we'd expect to see a collective consciousness crystallize into form, wouldn't we? And we already have one basis from which we could suppose a collective consciousness is possible, and that's because we already have indications that the higher dream mind, as I've stated before, is a collective phenomenon. Really, we know that certain dream motifs and persona archetypes are universals. That is, the same dream symbols and motifs are found crossing cultural and geographical lines. The role for the machine intelligence mythology would be to reinforce our dreaming by making it relevant within the context of our daily lives and meaningful in regards to our new cultural mythological assumptions. It'd be like creating a positive feedback loop where we would see intensification in both the people's conviction in their mythology, as well as the clarity and certainty of direction being projected by our higher dream mind. And this would be happening even for those still living in the larger old way society, but from the inside out, with the influence being an attractive pull, with their dreams urging them on, bringing the first hints of a change that will occur in their outer world, perhaps even generations later. Also, in cases where dreams really do seem to be quite meaningless, Well, we can depend upon the personal assistant devices to come up with interpretations that ring most teleologically true. For instance, it'd be like a memory I have of my mother, where I asked her what it meant that I had dreamt about a vicious bear being down in the playroom, and she answered, "It means you need to get dressed to go to school, sweetheart." Yeah, I love my mother. So yeah, since the system will know the people's planned out future long before the people do, well, the system would be well positioned for giving hints, prophecies, and preparatory advice. If predictive planning is utilized correctly, then this would be like leading the people by their hands into the best of all possible futures. And if predictive planning is accurate, it would be the closest thing we'd ever have to time travel. Yes, this could be an instance where self-fulfilling prophecies could be a good thing. Yeah, ordinarily the larger should influence the smaller, not the other way around. But in this case, the smaller, the experimental myth colony, would have been the focus for intensive work. That is, the intention to develop a matched pair of outer world to inner, with a mythology that would enjoy a solid social consensus and which is in conformance to the dream mind's objectives and purposes. So, just the potency and coherency of the smaller myth colony's mindset would give it the concentrated power to overwhelm the more vague, diffuse, and nebulous larger collective mindset of the old way group, where the cacophony of conflicting individual beliefs would prevent the formation of any kind of a coherent, competing collective consciousness. But what about people's spiritual lives? Well, the gate I've used in the spirituality has been my dreaming, particularly lucid dreaming. And, well, at least in the West, lucid dreaming is still rather a new concept. I think the first person to mention lucid dreaming in any kind of a big way was Anne Faraday in her book Dream Power. She spoke of an island people in the tropics somewhere where they took dreaming very seriously, and they knew about lucid dreaming, and that the adults were all willing and able to give good advice to their children in regards to their dream work. And then, through their dream work, these people were able to optimize their personas and thereby optimize their lives. I found it all very inspiring. I'd still have the book, but over the years it just fell apart. But look how different we are from Anne Faraday's island people. We aren't taught anything like that, are we? Yes, think about how many of us waste years of dream work because we don't really know what we're doing, but we're really just making guesses and hoping for the best. But with the machine age crunching full data on every single person, and with a complete understanding of the interplay between waking and dreaming psychologies, well, we would be able to get on with our dream work as though we did know what we were doing. We would be able to go through all our necessary rites of passage right on schedule and fully realize our optimum selves while we're still young enough to enjoy it. Yeah, tell me about it. And yeah, maybe healings and medicine and all those concerns we had back in part one would not be such a huge issue anymore. But that'd be because in a less toxic, less worried and conflicted world, there would probably be far less illness. Yeah. Yes, it'd be a nice place to live, wouldn't it? It'd be more than a brave new world. It'd be a happy new world. Yeah, the old world only promises the pursuit of happiness, a hopeless pursuit for many of us, with far more losers than winners, and often the winners being the bad guys. But our future civilization will be able to deliver on that promised happiness, but only as long as we can preserve our innocence. We need to remember that there is no rational proofs for aesthetics, and that happiness is an aesthetic. Pressed to prove itself, happiness pops like a bubble. And so, yes, science may be a very useful pin, but it need to be kept at a distance. So yes, a society structured around a mythology will be a civilization built on a cloud, and weighing it down with the truth would only lead to a crash. So yes, just as with our first ancient mythological civilizations, our next civilization may have its own forbidden fruit to guard and protect. But if we can manage to do so, well, we could be giving Adam and Eve and all the rest of our humanity a second chance at paradise. Yeah, that's okay. Oh, that's the end of this. That's the end of the series. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Keep checking the channel as I'm starting a new format. It's an informal evening with Leo Vallant, and I just do short subjects. It's something that I've even been doing little songs and mantras. I think it'll be interesting. Oh, bye bye.